Hello, I'm Simon Brown, and I've been macrobiotic since about 1980, when I used to share a flat with my sister Melanie. She was a great macrobiotic enthusiast and would cook lots of different delicious dishes, and I kind of fell in love with the food, and then after a while noticed I was much healthier. I was pretty sceptical, and we used to have huge arguments about some of the theories, but I for sure knew that the food worked for me, and that inspired me to make a lifelong inquiry of finding out more about macrobiotics and life in general and my own health and how different foods could affect it.
So how have you shared macrobiotics with other people?
Well, I ended up moving to America and living in Philadelphia for a couple of years. There I studied with lots of people like Misho and Aveline and Shizuko and different American people, and then came back and ran something in London called the Community Health Foundation, which at the time was probably Europe's largest alternative health centre. Had a macrobiotic restaurant, bookshop, food shop, and then about 5 big floors full of different kinds of activities and classes.
So how have you helped people through your education in macrobiotics?
Well, we used to run lots of different cooking classes, lots of different long-term trainings, and then I went on to do that myself, as working freelance, but I also got the chance to write a number of books. The first one was one called Against All Odds, which was written with Dr. Hugh Faulkner, and it really was all about his recovery from pancreatic cancer. After given only a few weeks to live, he went on to live another 8 years, and explained how he did that and recipes and everything. Later, after writing loads of books on Feng Shui and other subjects, I got to write a book on macrobiotics called Modern Day Macrobiotics, which is really all about macrobiotic foods and how to use them, what they are, recipes, menu plans and everything. But more recently I've written my first novel after about 13 or 14 other books, and that one's called The Healer, and it's really a story about a character and his exploration of macrobiotics in England and America. So hopefully readers would find it an engaging storyline with very interesting characters, but it describes everything you could want to know about macrobiotics. And funny enough, at about the same time I have a book coming out called Macrobiotics for Life, which is all about the macrobiotic foods, but also all the thinking behind macrobiotics and how we can use the macrobiotic theories and principles to improve the health of our minds and emotions as well as our physical body.
So how would you introduce macrobiotics to someone who's just starting? What advice would you give them? I
would make sure that they try the food in an open-minded, adventurous kind of way. Sense of humour always helps. And just make the food really tasty. It doesn't have to take ages to make, doesn't have to be complicated, but just go one step at a time and just really enjoy it and have a lot of fun with the ideas and the principles, and see if you can make it yours, so it's not second-hand borrowed from someone else, but ultimately so that it's out of your own experiences.
So how has macrobiotics kind of changed? I mean, the concepts around macrobiotics, how have you kind of made them more practical?
Well, I think in the 80s it became very conceptualised, and it sort of became known as the Cancer Cure diet, and therefore quite sort of purist and strict. But for me, and I think many other people now, it's much broader, much more accessible, it's much more open and easier to do. So the actual foods themselves, you can have a much bigger range and a much bigger choice, and the principles behind it now are much easier to take on and much more sort of practical in everyday terms.
So do you think it's safe for people to rely on their own intuition, or do they need guidance through the process?
Well, I think everyone at the beginning needs some kind of guidance. Where in the old days it was quite prescriptive and seemed quite rigid, but now I think people can get a much more flexible starting point, and then a sort of a good idea of what a macrobiotic diet could be, and try that for a while, and they can start to learn and play with the different ideas behind it. But I think it's important that they're always encouraged to develop their understanding and experiences to a point where they do use their intuition more, and they can be eating and living out of their own intuition for a while, and there's nothing wrong to going back to eating a diet for a while, or using principles like acid and alkaline or yin and yang for a while, but to have that choice and flexibility, not to be always stuck in one way of using macrobiotics.
So how have you personally kind of used the tools in your own life?
Well, I regularly test my own saliva in terms of acid and alkaline, and all my clients. When I do classes, I often test all the students, and that way I have a pretty good idea of what makes me more acidic or more alkaline according to my saliva, and that has influenced my diet. I think as a result of that I eat a lot more vegetables and more fruit than I used to.
So what about drinking? Because people say you should drink when you're thirsty. What do you think about the liquid intake?
Well, no, I'd certainly agree with that, and it's such a complicated subject. Probably the only real way you can tell whether you're drinking enough or too much is to just observe the colour of your urine, and if it's clear and watery, then you might be drinking too much, and if it's a darker colour or has a smell, then you might not be drinking enough. But we have to remember, with any kind of natural foods diet, and particularly someone eating a lot of macrobiotic style foods, it's got a very high water content in the first place, and that's all coming through into your blood.
So what about chewing? Because in the beginning people say you have to chew 100 times.
Well, I don't think that's the main thing to worry about at the beginning, but certainly it is interesting at some point to go for a week making a really big effort to chew a lot and just experience how you feel. I think sometimes macrobiotics appears a bit of an all or nothing diet, and you have to take on a huge number of challenging changes right at the beginning, which isn't the case at all. You can just do it gradually, step by step, and you could even just start with chewing and carry on with your normal diet, or add chewing in at another stage. But the more you chew, the more you physically break down your food, and the better you can mix it with your saliva, the more you digest it before it gets to your stomach, so it does make sense.
So do you see macrobiotics influencing the popular culture, like they're getting through to mainstream?
Well, I think it did in a huge way in the 70s and some of the 80s, through Aveline and all her work in the natural foods movement, and through Starting Airborne and so many other adventures that they introduced tofu and miso and shoyu and sea vegetables to the West, and so it had a big input then. I think our challenge now is to take macrobiotics and look at all the wealth of ideas and experience we have with it, and turn it into something that's highly accessible and immediate for people in terms of their health in the most holistic sense, so talking about mental, emotional and physical health.